Where could Overwatch's lore go in future from here? Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and given that we're kind of in the midst of 2024, Overwatch is roughly 8 or so years old now, depending on if you're counting from when it first released in May 2016. So it feels like a good time to take stock and see where we are with the lore, what stories have been concluding, what stories are kind of starting, and given that PvE has released and we've had a lot of lore released since Overwatch 2's revamp stroke launch in late 2022, where we can actually go from here. So we're going to talk about in this video a few different things. Where the lore has come from, a little bit about the history, where the lore is and we are now, what could come next and what are the thread stories we could explore, then maybe how we could explore this story, and also how I feel about where we are as well. Have a lightning quick trip through the last 8 years or so of Overwatch lore, which I kind of, having had a think about it, kind of chop up into sort of 4 or so different time periods with 3 or so different leads for the narrative teams, or kind of like the narrative vision, bringing us up to where we are now. Establishment of Overwatch, so we can date that maybe from 2014 when Overwatch was first announced at that fateful BlizzCon, or perhaps maybe 2016 or so when Overwatch first launched. There was the closed alpha and beta testing, we were moving up towards that 2016 launch. There were blogs being released, such as Fading Glory, which is still referenced today even when we discuss Overwatch lore. There were also, when we came to launch, of course, that massive glut of launch content. We had Recall, we had all of the animated shorts within that first year in a very short period of time, things like Hero. We had, of course, so many comics. I believe there were about 10 or so comics, then another 5 the year after. So obviously that 2016-2017 period, a real establishment of the lore. And of course it was Chris Metzen and Michael Chu working together, as well as the rest of the team, on what had come from Project Titan, then been built into Overwatch even before launch and announce in 2014. So that was kind of that first period there. And another key event in that time, of course, was the cancellation of First Strike, the 100-page graphic novel that was then cancelled in November 2016 at the end of that year, which was going to tell the whole story of the first Omnic Crisis and how Overwatch came together and beat it and started, beating back the tide. Now, that was cancelled basically for the reason that it would have nailed down a lot of Overwatch's story in ways that they wanted to explore in different manners. And I think it's kind of interesting coming back to it now, because you see that with everything we got, for example, around the launch of Overwatch 2 PvE, like with the 3 sort of anime kind of shorts that we got, and that a lot of that story has been repackaged and retold and perhaps expressed in more in-depth or different ways. I still love to think about what a 100-page Overwatch graphic novel would have looked like. I mean, it's out there somewhere. I'm sure it's not been destroyed, along with all of the writing and all of the pages that were drawn and coloured for it, but we'll have to see. But yeah, there's sort of period 1 of Overwatch to me. We can take that, of course, through Uprising as well. Now, the next bit I would probably say is kind of the expansion of the lore. There was definitely a sort of a 2-year period where there was kind of expansion going on after this initial roaring out of the gates of Overwatch being so popular. There was then a point where Chris Metzen left. Michael Chu, in this sort of second phase, was then taking on and leading the sort of narrative development of Overwatch. And there was a desire from us as players and as the community at the time to discover more out of the past, but then also discover like where Overwatch was going. And there was this challenge for the team in terms of how do we tell the past stories, but how do we move things forward and keep the story moving forward as well. So there were cool things in terms of PvE. We had Retribution, we had Storm Rising. Clearly at some point during this 2019 kind of period, there was the decision to kind of launch Overwatch 2. Create Overwatch 2 and do Overwatch 2 as a thing before the late 2019 BlizzCon kind of announced, but more on that later. We still had comics during this period. There was clearly work done during this period that was laying the sort of origins and the foundation of the short stories that started releasing a bunch during this time. That followed, the team were looking for ways to expand the world, to move the story forward in these short stories and tell other events on the universe, whilst jumping into characters and expanding things around characters and maps as we had in the normal sort of cadence of Overwatch kind of content relaunch. Not only points around the Overwatch world, but also points outside of the Overwatch world on the moon as well, for example. There was a lot of kind of filling in of the world of Overwatch and development, this expansion of the world. So what happened on the moon, at the Horizon Lunar Colony, for example. We had Hammeh, what was going on in Junkertown. There was that tie through as well, for example, with the short stories talking about things like Morrison's journey, Anna's journey with Bastet, and talking about relationships and filling in depth of character, an expansion of the world, an expansion of characters, and kind of tying a lot of it together, and that process sort of beginning and continuing here. Of course, up until what I'd probably call the sort of third era of Overwatch lore. From, let's say, 2019 to, let's say, roughly early 2022, perhaps, during this kind of period. And in the spirit of keeping the naming convention going, I've kept it with ease and gone for the Ethereal Era. It was kind of like delicate, light lore going on, and this was when we went from Overwatch 2 announcement with 0 Hour and everything around that, to then a piece of Echo and the moment of Echo, which I'll talk about in a second, and that being sort of a line drawn by Blizzard saying, you know what, this is the last hero we're doing for a while, we're focusing on Overwatch 2, and then moving forward through that quieter period with the pandemic and other things going on. So during this period, of course, like November 2019, Overwatch 2 was announced at BlizzCon. I was there thanks to Blizzard, my one and only BlizzCon, and Blizzard kindly sent us there, so got to experience that, play it, and enjoy everything to do with it. Really, really excited for it. During that period, we then, of course, went into 2020 and the P word, the pandemic, and as of that, in April 2020, I actually got to sort of interview and chat with the dev team and stuff on Echo as well, and that being the sign-off of the last Overwatch hero for a while. And during this period with the pandemic, it felt that like things, well, plans continued, but at the same time there was a little bit of slowdown as the team worked on Overwatch 2. We had, of course, novels, The Hero of Numbani, that came out. There was also teasers during 2020 for Deadlock Rebels, which came out the year after. 2, we had London Calling, the 5-comic long Tracer series, and other bits and pieces dropping too. You may even remember the Kanazaka deathmatch level when that released, and of course the Yamagami letter, really teasing Kiriko that we weren't going to see for another year after that until 2022. So stories still moving forward, but a little bit more slowly as the focus was on Overwatch 2. Just before the pandemic started, Michael Chu left, sort of ending his time stewarding and moving forward and working on the Overwatch lore and all of the great work that he did. And of course, Jeff also left kind of in the middle of 2021. Now, during that time, of course, there were the Blizzard sort of controversies and scandals, lots going on. People looking at Riot Games and bad past in the industry there, and also Blizzard, things to do with sexual harassment and other serious topics and things, many of which have been settled or solved in various lawsuits since. In the midst of that was when Deadlock Rebels, the book released, for example, when McCree's name was changed to Cassidy, amongst other things. So a tough period, as well as the focus on Overwatch 2 development and the pandemic, but also Blizzard as a company, even though the Overwatch team was not mentioned in anything to do with those revelations and allegations and scandals in 2021. Still a very sort of weird time for everyone in the world, and particularly tough time for those at Blizzard, particularly those involved in these kind of things. So an era kind of ended then, and then we moved forward to the next one, which I think was really, I've called it, again, sitting with the E theme, Extrapolation and Enrichment, which maybe is a little bit over the top. But obviously the latest narrative lead, who again has since gone, Gavin, was sort of hired and jumped in. And this was the run-up to planning for work on and run-up to Overwatch 2. Now, when Michael Chu left, probably a lot of Overwatch 2 is sort of semi-formed, maybe from 2020 onwards. I think obviously working towards the 2022 release, there was a chunk of work. There were new hires on the Overwatch narrative team as well. There was also the hiring of Blizzard sort of historian people to the historian, sort of like lore consistency team, the little team that Blizzard have, which is super cool. That was in July 2022. That role was on an Overwatch and Diablo kind of focus at the time. So this run up to launch, we then started seeing things being launched a bunch again. Junker Queen short, Kiriko short, it was saved, but then the Sojourn short, and similar as we were in this big run up to launch, getting the gang back together, particularly after the events of some of the recent short stories. And then of course, with the announcement of and then launch of Overwatch 2 and the announcement of PV then coming later, we then had a lot of stuff that continued to progress, as well as the Sojourn novel, of course, let's not forget that. We then had things like Genesis, the short animated series of 3 episodes that came out when Overwatch 2 PvE launched. We had those stories and those missions, the 3 story missions. We have also had 2 pretty cool things literally within the last sort of 8 months or so. We've had Overwatch Declassified, the big Overwatch lore tome and Bible, pulling together a whole chunk of the Overwatch world, which has been super cool, as well as Heroes Ascendant, the 8 short stories in a compilation. They're being released one by one on the Overwatch website, but we could also get those as of recently earlier in 2024. So all of this has kind of brought us to, I think, where we are now. But there's a very, very potted summary of what I think are sort of the 4 different periods of kind of like Overwatch's lore and its history and the phases it's kind of gone through. But what about now? 2016, that's kind of the 8 years of Overwatch. 10 years nearly if you count the BlizzCon 2014 introduction and announcement. We've kind of been left at the beginning of this, broadly speaking, second Omnic crisis, or you can call it the null sector crisis or global crisis, on a bit of a cliffhanger. We have had the Overwatch story missions taking us from the 2019 cinematic of 0 Hour through Rio, through Toronto, through Gothenburg, and then at the end of those a couple of things happening. Torbjorn staying behind, making sure that he's researching these kind of neural sort of nullifiers. Null sector appear to be targeting and focusing onto Omnics around the world. And we've also been, of course, from Zurich in Soldier 76 and Sombra's story. From the Heroes Ascendant short stories, we've popped at different places around the world, anything from one day after the events of Paris in Symmetra and Lifeweaver's story, through to perhaps a few more days afterwards, and we've been exploring this short period after Overwatch has shown itself as being back in the events of Paris and 0 Hour. But we also know that Bastion is going to be coming back with them as well, and no Torbjorn. What of other threads around here? Well, we've had, for example, in the events after Gothenburg, it's specifically called out, A Great Day, manga's sort of animated short, very 80s cartoon style, and following on the story from that for the Talon team and group. We are kind of put in a place where we've explored a lot of different stories and a lot of different characters, a lot of different parts of the world, and hinted on to what nexts with regards to this first sort of period in this second Omnic crisis, or crisis that's happening to Omnics. So I think at this point where we are right now, just to sort of set an expectation or a theory from my side, we're not going to see any resolution to this second Omnic crisis anytime soon. This is our framework. This is our framework that Heroes Ascendant has been playing in, that hero releases can drop into, that maps can drop into, various storytelling can tell parallel stories in the world. We're going to be in this place almost in a, not a villain of the week or a disaster of the week or month kind of thing, where like cartoons, for example, Overwatch or new Overwatch will jump around the world to different places, maybe meeting up with different characters and solving different problems. We have, outside of the new Overwatch crew, people like Soldier 76, we have Ana, who is trying to now protect Overwatch agents, and other threads like that. So we have this framework. Where could different bits of the story potentially go next? And if you have any theories, please do let me know in the comments below. Love to know where you think the Overwatch story would go next. Love chatting about that with you guys in the comments and similar. So number one, obviously this null sector invasion, the second Omnic crisis. What are these neural inhibitor devices? We know actually from one of the short stories in Heroes Ascendant, and with Reinhardt being warned off doing it, if you try and destroy one of these on an Omnic's head, it actually kills them. That's from Ash's short story in Heroes Ascendant. So these things are very, very dangerous. They can't just be removed or destroyed or taken off. They need to be somehow properly removed. Why is Ramatra? Why are null sector using them? And what is the goal of null sector here? What is their goal? We know that, for example, in Symmetra's short story, Rebuilding Ruins, the attacking null sector force at the Atlantic Arcology specifically targets Omnics above the humans. You know, they're trying to get to the Omnics and install these neural inhibitors. So why is this happening? Also, another thread there, why is or how is Ramatra working with Doomfist or Talon? Let's not forget the connection at the end of Storm Rising when Doomfist has a chat with Ramatra there. Now, another one, obviously from the story mode, and an unanswered question, Zenyatta. We have seen Talon and Widowmaker and Sombra showing up to Suravasa, where Zenyatta is meditating. Now, what is going to happen here? We've seen also, by the way, for that storyboards and animatics and things of Genji showing up to defend him. And we also know that this was a planned story level. This is all kicking around somewhere still. Now, how and whether this story sees the light of day, I would say, as another 3 story missions, who knows, but we can talk about that a bit more later. But yeah, we have those unanswered Zenyatta and Genji threads for sure. Now, the second thing, I think, Overwatch's part, or new Overwatch's part in all this. So we can see all of these characters coming together or meeting as Overwatch sort of dots around the world, and how they interact. A very simple example, the Hanzo and Genji reunion. after the events of Dragons many years ago, and that animated short years back. In the recent short story Hanzo and Kiriko senses, for example, Hanzo is not ready quite yet for that reunion with Genji, but that's something that could be written within this the world trying to solve the Omnic Crisis framework. Certainly something that could come up there. One that we've had since 2016, and that's huge, I guess, in the first era of Overwatch Lore, Sombra ARG. Big shout out to the OGs who were there in 2016, hunting for Sombra's clues, the Sky Code and all that kind of jazz. We saw, and if you haven't checked that out, by the way, I've done a whole video on it, doing whole videos on all of the Heroes Ascendant short stories, so I'll link the playlist here. We saw Soldier and Sombra have a little bit of a clue, a little bit of a MacGuffin, a plot device, and who knows what it's going to be, but it has the symbol projecting from it. It was found in the ruins of the Swiss headquarters and locked up in a storage unit in Zurich by the UN for many years. But it's some kind of object, and it projects the I logo, the I conspiracy. Who runs the world? Who shocked Sombra all those years ago? Well, turns out they might be something to do with the Swiss HQ, and Sombra has tipped off Jack Morrison to go to Oasis, which we've actually heard not much about beyond the fact that it exists and it has a level in the Overwatch lore. We know that Moira was kind of Minister of Genetics, as it were, there as well. She got a position. So who knows what's going on there and how that could be tied into everything going on with Sombra, but also potentially the downfall of Overwatch 2. Following up on that list that Reaper stole from Watchpoint Gibraltar in the events of Recall in 2016. Reaper has been killing Overwatch agents and going through that list. Ana is now trying to protect people on that list too. Also, the Junkers. The Junkers could be going beyond Junkertown. They could be going airborne. Spoiler alert. After they finally discovered the secret that Junkrat has been talking about for all of these years in the ruins of the Australian Omnium that Junkertown is built on. So again, another Heroes Ascendant reference. But what will the Junkers do if they have access to, let's say, intercontinental travel? Could be very interesting. Could certainly see them getting involved more around Australia. And as for other threads and other pieces that are going on, well, we, of course, literally just as of Season 11, have had Runa Sarpi, the Peruvian, the Iliari map release for push. Of course, since Iliari's launch and her voice lines and interactions with Moira that we saw when she launched, there's always been a little bit of something where there's a bit of snark, a little bit of beef back and forth, particularly with Iliari to Moira. So teasings, like foreshadowings and things there. Now, I believe we'll do a separate video on that. Keep an eye out. We'll have a look for that in the coming days. But I've seen a few threads bouncing around on Twitter where people have found various Oasis references. So we'll have a dig into those and see what people have found. But it looks as though there could be a tie between perhaps Iliari and her people and various things, perhaps to do with Oasis or the Moira or the Ministry of Genetics. So that could be very interesting to have a look at. A new one there as well. Lots of these little things Overwatch can drop, whether it's new heroes when Space Ranger releases later this year. We already know that that's going to be something to do with Mars, so we're going to get to have a look at the Overwatch universe in space beyond the moon and things as well, which should be very fun. What kind of ways could these various pieces of story be told, and how could they be developed? How could we get there? Which is pretty cool to think about. So let's get the hopium out of the way to start with. I still think we know that there's resource and we know that stuff has been worked on. We don't know what state it's in, to be fair, but there could be, maybe, just maybe, another set of one-off archive style missions, whether it's 3 of them together in a pack in future, or whether maybe they release them one by one as an event or something like that. Could be possible for them to slowly sort of use whatever they have left there. Now, of course, the Overwatch 2 dev team have said multiple times over the last half year that their focus is on the game as a service, on the day-to-day, on content for the game on a frequent basis, and, you know, stepping back from that playable content for the time being. I'll be interested to see how well the Overwatch 2 Invasion story sort of DLC pack actually sold. That'll be an interesting one for the future if that comes out at some point. My gut feeling is that it did okay, but not as well as they would have liked, or they don't think it did as well as it should have done for the amount of time and effort they put in. But nothing to sort of back that up with, apart from my own sort of speculation there. So maybe we'll get those at some point. Maybe the content that's in there is, for example, Zenyatta's story with Widow, with Genji, with Sombra, that kind of fight and chase. We know that that's teed up at the end of Overwatch Invasion. Maybe that can continue to be told perhaps in another way. How else can these stories be told? Well, other games, I say with a little bit of hopium, but with a big star and caveat next to that. I'm thinking kind of like light touch stuff, like, for example, take Overwatch. lighter touch than some of the development they have been doing. I'm not saying that's not game development and work in its own right, of course it is, but things that maybe are a little bit lighter on the resource end, depending on how the teams are structured and who they get to work on these things. We could perhaps see more visual novels. That could be a way to explore some fun side stories or have some more fun. Another option that I thought of is the licensing out of Overwatch IP so that other studios can make games off it. So you see this a lot, for example, maybe not to the wide extent that it's been done with Warhammer, but like take the Warhammer license and IP. Like loads of people recently have been making different kind of Warhammer stories in the Warhammer world, jumping around and doing it in different things like Warhammer Bolt Gun. You see the strategy games, you see like all different kinds of sort of versions of Warhammer popping up. So that's an option. Whether Microsoft or Blizzard would allow that, whether they see it as being profitable or something they can do, we're just going to have to see. I got recently recommended by a buddy, Midnight Suns, Marvel's Midnight Suns, which I'm showing here very briefly as footage now. Now, I missed this when it came out. I was very busy in the contract work I was doing at the time, and this was really targeted at me, but the marketing never got to me, so I'm not sure quite why that was. I was aware of it, but I think this game is fantastic. I picked it up for free. It's no longer free on Epic Store, so sorry that I've not told you about it before, but it's like a combination of like XCOM tactical turn-based battling. You have like sort of a little card mechanic and engine driving it too. I love card games. There's loads of story. You have like this base, the Abbey. You can have conversations. You can increase your friendship with different characters. There's nothing like romantic because it's a studio using the Marvel IP, and obviously Marvel I don't think at this point in time are going to allow a game to be made where you let all of their intellectual properties and characters kiss and all that. It's not a Baldur's Gate 3 is what I'm saying, and I don't think Marvel would give a studio that freedom with the image of their characters at this point in time. But yeah, this game is cracking. It has sort of Mass Effect, Dragon Age, BioWare kind of style, Knights of the Old Republic, characters, sort of party friendships, relationships, conversations, loads of conversations, fun writing in a similar way. Actually, if you played Square Enix's, Eidos Montreal, I think it was, or Eidos's Guardians of the Galaxy game a few years back, like really good banter in that kind of way. So who knows? I think that Overwatch could be great in this kind of game. Really, really good. Could be so much fun just to have a play with. But whether that will get made by Blizzard or whether it will be perhaps licensed out in the future and maybe another studio can give that a crack, I'd love to see in the future. Quick look and a quick thought about like other things that I certainly thought would be cool at some point, and indeed probably still do, and that other sort of games publishers and game studios have kind of tried, and the various sort of mixed successes and not that they've had with those. Take League of Legends very briefly. That's kind of like, if Overwatch is 8 years old, League of Legends is kind of like 15 or pushing that. Riot had a whole bunch of studios sort of internally or working with Riot under the label of Riot Forge, making things like the Song of Nunu and different story experiences in the League of Legends universe, telling different stories. And those games, I've not played them, I should, from friends who have played them. They think they're very, very good. They think they're really, really solid, not only games, but also pieces of storytelling in the light of the games industry's sort of slight regression, redundancies and things since the boom of COVID and lockdown in terms of expansion and growth and profit, and then the retrenchment that we've seen recently. Riot Forge is gone. Those games aren't going to be focused on any time soon. Riot did have Arcane. Arcane Series 2 is coming out later. I know a lot of people have liked the idea of an Overwatch anime or animated series or some kind of media. Those can be great, like in the case of Arcane. Also, they can have less popular critical reception. I really liked it, but like Dota 2 Dragon's Blood, so Dota from Valve, has an entire Netflix series that you can check out, which, I have really enjoyed. It's non-canon. It's a story set in the Dota universe, and it's non-canon, but it's dealing with a bunch of characters, and really, really enjoyable. Really, really liked it. But it was not as critically acclaimed as Arcane. Kind of two different vibes, kind of two different ways of storying, two different looks, feels, and very different things. I think that they're both great in their own ways. But yeah, some of the things that we wish for Overwatch would be hard to do, and if they're not being worked on at this point, I think Arcane was sort of 4 years or so before it was announced even, and it was in development for quite a long time. I'm not 100% sure whether Overwatch is in that place right now, but like I said, Overwatch is 8, League of Legends is 15. If Overwatch is healthy and keeps on going and has a community and the game is supported and people love the world and characters, who knows for the future? Could be possible, but maybe at this stage it's not something that's going to be rushed and it'll have to be done in the right way. Of course, Microsoft's Halo's TV series, I've not heard great things about that, so not necessarily a Microsoft thing there, but of course Acti Blizzard and Blizzard are now under the Microsoft umbrella, so we have to be cognizant of those kind of things. And just as a final quick little bit of storytelling, or how story can be told in a way that works for a live service, where there have to be updates every month, a couple of months, a big update every 3 months, otherwise players get sort of, switched off. Just as a general live service, we'll take Overwatch's history at this point out of the window, just to talk about how you can talk about and do story in a different way. I actually quite like Dota's example recently. Now, this is not a ringing endorsement of everything to do with Dota or Valve. Valve indeed are known for not only gambling loot boxes, but also very expensive hats, very expensive cosmetics and things in various different kinds of ways. But Dota have this event on at the moment called Crownfall, which lasts for 4 to 5 months. It's got 4 different chapters, which you can buy a premium bit for £5 or so, I think, each, with a discount if you want to. You get these sort of discounts by each bit of the story effectively being a map. You can play through the map. There's a lot of free skins, free currency that gives you a financial discount on buying stuff within a particular store. Each bit has back and forth dialogues, written conversations between the characters. The story's been told of 2 characters and them effectively returning to try and challenge the evil queen that killed her sister and stole her throne effectively, hence Crownfall. So yeah, it's very cool. There's a comic with each of these, so stories being told. It brings in lots of different characters. It lasts over 5 months. Yes, of course, there are skins that you can buy associated with it. Yep, they're 25 quid. They're not cheap, and yeah, not a wonderful price, but they're there for 5 months. If you like that character and if you want to buy a 20 quid skin over 5 months, it's not going to disappear in a very short period of time. Just by playing for free, you can enjoy the story, you can do some really cool stuff, but there are ways where you can tip in a bit of money if you're enjoying that experience for 4 or 5 months if you like. And given that there are 4 chapters of this, you're getting a chapter every sort of month and a half or so. So yeah, it's a nice ongoing piece of event. And to progress on this map, you just play normal games and you can play different heroes in casual modes, and it gives you the opportunity to earn your progress by playing and winning matches by moving along this track. So a bunch of fun, like a different way to tie in making some cash for the company because we live in a society, etc. But of course, it's not going to be completely free, with telling story, moving story forward, pulling different characters in and things like that. So yeah, just something a bit different there. Hopefully in future, of course, we've had sort of story-based events that release with a skin, a comic, and a little thing to earn. But other people are doing live services in different ways, and there's maybe, hopefully, capacity for Blizzard to do something cool like this in the future too. Let's see how it goes. How I feel about all this. Overwatch is an 8-year-old game. It's an 8-year-old game which has had a launch and a refresh sort of in the last couple of years as well. Now, we have over these 4 phases that I talked about at the beginning, as in our sort of most recent phase before now, we've had an uptick. We've had a certain increase in the amount of lore being released. It has been phased over the last couple of years. We've had our PvE missions. We've had a lore Bible, effectively, in Overwatch Declassified. A bunch of short stories, pulling together new characters and setting us up to this kind of point. So we've got to a point where now, after the PvE, after Declassified and after Heroes Ascendant, our story has been brought to a point of, to be honest, for me, it feels like we've been brought to a what next? We're setting up new threads in the story that are probably going to go on through this second Omnic crisis, which will lead us to explore different bits of the world, different to new characters, maybe fill in some of the spaces that people have been asking about, like Iliari, for example. How about the Eye Conspiracy? All of those kind of things. And with the hero launch pattern that Overwatch 2 has, looking for this new hero kind of every 4 months or so, since, let's say, for example, Venture, Manga before and similar, we're in a place where we can have hero launches, pulling the story forwards. If short stories come out again, then maybe there will be a new bunch of those. And Overwatch, by the way, have been using those as like monthly. I think it's monthly. I need to double check. But they're releasing a short story from Heroes Ascendant pretty much every 3 to 4 weeks. Need to double check the time frequency. So you buy the Heroes Ascendant, you can read all the stories to start with. And then after a period of, let's say, 6 to 8 months or something like that, Overwatch have released them all for free. But you can read them all to start with if you want to pay for the book. So again, another way to support lore and story there, and maybe we'll see a bit more of that in future. Of course, we have new maps, in-game narrative, like Runa Sapi example is a recent example, which will continue to move the story forward as they have before. And who knows, maybe we'll have more events. So things like Mirrorwatch, for example, not direct canon lore, but having fun with the world, having fun with the characters. And for people who enjoy the world and the characters, things like Starwatch, a good way of exploring different bits of different characters too. There is a question as to what next, and it would be loath of me to mention, for example, that in the recent series of layoffs at Blizzard and otherwise, Gavin, the most recent Overwatch narrative director, has gone on to exciting and other things, a new studio. We miss him well. He's got a great new role, working on a great new game since. Christy Golden, for example, has, after many years of being part of Blizzard's sort of central narrative development team, the central franchise team, she wrote Symmetra's story, for example, Stone on Stone, which is like Stone by Stone, which is fantastic. Probably my favourite story, actually, of all of the Overwatch stories, maybe on a par with perhaps Bastet in that kind of way. So we have had like big losses, of course, to like not only the Blizzard narrative team, but also the Overwatch narrative team recently as well. However, of course, the beginning of this video, and this is not underplaying anyone's contribution, is that obviously big people have moved on from Overwatch and the story has moved forward, and we've got cool new things and different new people have managed to step forward. Although I'll be honest with you, with the recent sort of set of redundancies from Blizzard, the announcements from Overwatch team in particular that they're focusing more on the game as a service live piece and a little bit less on certainly on the in-game storytelling in terms of probably playable PvE content for the time being. It's going to be interesting to see whether those story missions show the light of day. So I do think we're at a turning point in Overwatch lore where maybe we'll see ourselves get into a cadence of hero release and stories. We might get short stories. We will get assets around hero releases and maybe around map releases. Comics can still pop up, but will we get playable story in that kind of form? Will we get a big project like an anime anytime soon? I think it very much depends on how Overwatch does now. We're also in a period where, hey, Pink Mercy, hey, Mercy Mythic, Pink Mercy returns, let's get stuck in. And to close up, we're also seeing, particularly since the end of 2023, the amount of collaborations that Overwatch is working on, and creative resources are going towards those. That's not a bad thing. I think Cowboy Bebop was cool. You have stuff like obviously Le Seraphim and things like that. Porsche, a bit of an odd one for me. My marketing brain somewhat gets it. My Overwatch player brain is a bit like not 100% sure on that one. And then, of course, Transformers announced soon. So we're seeing Overwatch really going into overdrive in terms of making sure that there's content for people to come and enjoy, cool things alongside that content, whether it's stuff like Mirrorwatch or whether it's these collabs. So I don't know if we're going to see PvE story missions again, but there is resource there that could be repurposed. We're just going to have to see. As a final point as well, final point, typical ham ramble. I'm keen to see the story move forward, but I think we need to set our expectations that we're in a framework where a lot of stories can be told. Now, past me was always really keen to know what happened next. And after 8 years or so, we've been given a lot of what happened next now, whilst having had a lot of cool past stories told around those things. Now, I was always wanting to see the story move forward, but I was always an advocate for learning more about, like, for example, Reyes or past stories of other characters, particularly in the short stories, and understanding maybe what they've been up to since the fall of Overwatch. The series of short stories was always really good for that. We're out of the Overwatch 2 launch phase now. It's going to be 2 years in late 2024, come October 2024, 2 years since Overwatch 2 launched, depending on how you view that. We're going to be almost a year actually since Overwatch PvE launched. We're out of those launch phases now. All of the glut, the bigger amount of content that a company will do towards launching a new game and launching the Overwatch 2 PvE missions, that is done. So now we're kind of in a sustain and maintain kind of phase. A regular cadence. What's happening every 3 months? What's happening every 4 months? How many big content releases are there here just for the game in general? And what part does lore and story have alongside that? I hate to sound clinical and business-like, but it's kind of, we're approaching the long tail piece unless other big things are happening in the franchise elsewhere. For Overwatch as a game and the story alongside it, we're seeing how things go on a 3-month, 4-monthly basis, probably for now, I think. Now, there may be things more regular than that. Like I said, at the moment we have monthly short stories, that have been dropped in a book. We need to see how that goes, and I think that's cool. It has been a weird time with the Blizzard layoffs recently in particular, and Gavin, Christy Golden, everyone who's worked on the Overwatch story over 8 years, and particularly those who have sadly had to leave recently, massive thanks for all of the cool stuff that you've done and the joy you brought me and no doubt many Overwatch fans all along the world with the wonderful world that you built over all of this period of time. So optimistic to see where we go, realistic to see that we're kind of at the end of a phase, not at the end of an era, but with these phases I've talked about. It's going to be interesting to see what the next chapter of Overwatch, what the next couple of years is going to be like, and it's always going to be covered. I'll always talk about it. As long as I enjoy it and we're enjoying it, there'll always be some bits about it here. So don't go away. How do you feel about where it is right now? Have you been here since 2016? Have you joined Overwatch recently in the last couple of years, the world of Overwatch, and experiencing these luring characters? What would you like to see happen next? Let me know in the comments below. I love to hear your thoughts. Maybe we'll do some videos like I used to in the past where we take your comments, take your theories, discussions. We can talk about theories, do a bit of like headcanoning and seeing what we're doing, but love to hear your thoughts. And if you like this video, do throw a like, subscribe. Let me know how you're doing, what you'd like to see. Love to hear your thoughts as well. And of course, all my Overwatch lore, short stories, animated shorts, voice lines interactions over 8 years. I'm talking about Overwatch lore. Now, some of it a little out of date. I might do some new stuff, but all in the playlists here. Cheers for tuning in as always. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.